Start our recording for us. I want to welcome everybody, of course. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate you for coming to the OLLI Brown Bag presentation, From Seeing to Doing, the Clarke Museum at 61. And we are lucky to have Katie Buesch with us today. Today's Brown Bag presentation is brought. Their contributions really help us bring quality presentations like this and help keep OLLI being able to bring in good instructors and offer interesting classes. So we thank you. As a reminder, our OLLI memberships are now open. They run all year.
More effectively in China. He's expected to hold a virtual meeting with President Xi in the
discounts on classes. They also create a sense of community for us. I think our numbers are up. I think right now.
Administration vision is expected to go for.
Also, I want to put a little plug in. I get the honor of hosting these Let's Connect on Fridays, and they're at 10 in the morning. And it's just a group of people who come in, and every week we have a different topic, and they're facilitated by Tracy Barnes-Priestley, she's amazing. She's always a good time. So I really recommend you guys jump on our website and sign up for these.
We can't hear you, Alex.
Can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, my mic.
You want to try again?
Yeah. Did you guys hear? So our recordings, we are recording, and it will be available on our website. You where the green arrow is pointing in the middle of our website, there is the brown bag lunch icon, and just click on that, and you will be able to find our archive. And it goes back. We probably have over 100 in there, probably way more than 100 in there. So a lot of interesting stuff. As a reminder, we ask you to please mute yourself just so we can give Katie the opportunity to be heard pretty clearly. In terms of questions, we ask that you please pop them in the chat, and Katie will try to answer those at the end. So I'll go ahead and pass it off to Jane, but I also just want to acknowledge and thank you all for being here.
And welcome to you all. Sorry that she was fading in and out occasionally, but you could probably read the content on the slides. Don't know what was going on. But in any event, we are delighted to have you here today and to have Katie Buesch with us. She became the executive director at the Clarke Museum in January of 2020 after being the registrar curator since 2017. She attended HSU, where she graduated summa cum laude with degrees in religious studies and cultural anthropology, which she gets to use daily at the museum. The Clarke Historical Museum is Humboldt County's local history museum. It's been housed in the historic 1912 Bank of Eureka building in Old Town since 1960, and it features a variety of exhibits on the pre- and post-contact history of Humboldt County in Northwestern California. It's well known for its sizable collection of items related to the native tribes of the area. Katie, it's all yours.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today. I'm going to share my screen really quick for the slideshow. Here we go. All right. So can everyone see it? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, yep, as was mentioned, my name is Katie Buesch. I'm the executive director and curator at the Clarke Museum here in Eureka. And today we'll be looking at the history of the Clarke Museum, more recent happenings at the museum, and our tentative plans for the future. Oh, there we go. So we'll start out with a quick overview of the history of the museum. One thing that's kind of interesting is that there has never actually been a comprehensive history written about the museum. We have a lot of the materials to do so, but it just hasn't happened. We do have an intern, though, that is starting to work on going through Cecile Clark's journals to kind of get an understanding of Cecile as a person, because we have all of her journals for most of her life, from at least the 1920s into the 70s. So we should have a more complete story with that. But for now, we'll tell you kind of the bare bones version of this story. So Cecile Clark was born in Mendocino on her family's sheep farm. And she had an early interest in local native artifacts that she would find while digging in the garden, mostly things like projectile points and rock shards and things like that. She attended what is now UC Berkeley and majored in history, and then came back to Mendocino to teach before moving to Eureka and teaching at Eureka High, starting in 1915. Eureka High School at the time had a museum, which is really cool. I know the schools I went to didn't have a museum, which is a bummer. And Cecile, whether by her choice or by assignment, we don't really know. I would guess by choice, just with my understanding of her. She became in charge of the museum and grew it through purchases and donations. And then around the 1920s and 30s, and even into the 60s, Cecile and her students and some of later on museum staff were allowed to excavate on what's now known as Tuluwat Island. We found some letters from the Little River Logging Company encouraging Cecile to stop excavations due to protests by the Hoopa people up north of here. And another letter from the State Indian Museum encouraging Cecile to continue her excavations in pursuit of science, calling the concerns about the excavations, quote, borrowed trouble. Cecile wasn't the first one to excavate the island, and she followed around 3 or 4 other documented amateur archaeologists who conducted excavations of the island, many of whom sold some of their finds to Cecile for the museum. In the present day, this kind of work is now seen as highly unethical due to the lack of tribal consultation, among many other reasons. And also the sale of grave items is now illegal. But if you want to have more information on that specific section of Cecile and the museum's history, there's a book called Grave Matters by Tony Platt, who he went through and did a really good exploration of that history, but it's part of the museum's history, so it's important to share it. The museum at Eureka High School grew in size over Cecile's 35 years at the school, but the population of Eureka was also growing at the same time, and museum space was needed for things like classrooms for the increasing student body. Her family had sold their very successful sheep farm, and with some of that money, Cecile purchased the Bank of Eureka building, which had been built in 1912 by Albert Peasy, who was an architect out of San Francisco. This is the furthest north building he ever built outside of San Francisco. So it's kind of interesting, about, a little piece of history. It had been vacant for a number of years by that time, and Old Town wasn't the best place in town. But Cecile hoped that the museum could become an anchoring institution in the area, which still had a lot of its historic buildings, and which is pretty incredible that they're still around. She toured school groups around her new museum pretty regularly, and still to this day, we have people who come by to visit who remember touring with or having Cecile as a teacher. I always like to ask them if they ever saw her smile. The answer is usually no. She was a very serious lady, but she did have a sense of humor from what I've been able to figure out. She required that admission would be free for anyone so that anyone could visit the museum. And we still continue that today. We're donation-based. So here's some early pictures of that early museum in the bank building. She took a put everything on display approach, which is a little overwhelming. If I were to walk into here, I wouldn't know where to start. So when you look at this museum layout compared to more modern museum layouts, this one doesn't really have a lot of information with the items. So when you're walking around, you might need to either have existing knowledge or be walking around with someone who knows what you're looking at and can explain it, which is a very it limits who can understand the history of the space you're in. So that's kind of something to think about. Also, it's kind of crazy to look at all the baskets, how they're on display, hanging on the walls and whatnot. And that problem was solved in a couple of years, and I'll talk about that. So in 1979, the city of Eureka had received funds from an economic development grant and was able to organize with a local business owner the construction of Nilas Hall. So the city built the building, and the way that it's managed now is that the city is in charge of the exterior of the building and the museum is in charge of the interior. And it's through this collaboration that the museum was able to be expanded, and all of those baskets and things that were all on the walls ended up moving into Nilas Hall. The hall was officially completed and dedicated in 1979, and that was a few months after Cecile had passed away. She had not been working at the museum for a few years by that point. She had been seriously injured when she took a tumble down the stairs here, and that forced her to retire. The museum, thanks to an establishment of an endowment and a trust fund with Cecile's estate after she had passed away, was able to continue the museum after Cecile's death. And the museum continues to benefit from those investments, which are supplemented with donations, memberships, and some money from the city of Eureka, which continues to support the museum to this day. And we'll talk about that too. So in the 1990s, the passage of NAGPRA, which is the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act, became law, federal law, requiring that museums and other institutions receiving federal funds must return items meeting certain criteria to the people from which those items came from. The museum began the process of repatriation in the 1990s, and this process continues today. This could be its own whole presentation on its own, as the law and the process is complex. But the spirit of the law is to restore culturally significant items to the communities that created them and return relatives of present Native communities to their homes. This kind of work can help rebuild relationships between Native folks and museums and improve opportunities for beneficial, culturally sensitive collaborations for both groups. If you want more information on that, there is more information on the Clarke Museum and how we're related to NAGPRA. I can share the link at the end. So we're kind of taking a really big fast forward here, but into 2018. So I started working here at the end of 2017, and kind of one of my first tasks was to box up everything in the pharmacy cabinets at the front of the museum because they were moving, because we were having a new neighbor in the building. So the Eureka Visitor Center, which at that time was run by Humboldt Maid, moved into the museum, and it ended up being a really overwhelmingly positive and beneficial happening at the museum. And that was orchestrated by our past director, Ben, who's in a picture here, and Alana Powell, who works at Humboldt Maid. And it ends up making a lot of sense to have a visitor center for Eureka in a museum, because this is such an area that is very historic. There's a lot of historic buildings that, you know, in the 60s and 70s and 80s during economic booms elsewhere, and even here, a lot of times historic buildings would be demolished and a lot of places would lose that kind of historical soul. But there's also 35 some history and history related organizations in this area. So having a spot where visitors to the area could come in and become acquainted with this really rich history that engages so many people here makes a lot of sense. So that year, the bank building also got a new roof. It was a modern membrane type roof that is white, which is kind of interesting. It makes it a great place to get a tan while you're getting a lunch break in the summertime. And it protects one of the museum's greatest treasures, which is, of course, our building. It was a largely crowdsourced fundraiser project, as most grants and things don't cover buildings or infrastructure type stuff like that. They usually cover programs. So we relied on our community to help us raise the money for that roof. Exhibits that year also included one on fraternal organizations of Humboldt County. It was my first experience making an exhibit. There were these paper letters that appeared throughout the exhibit that I had to cut on a Cricut cutter, and it took literally forever, but they looked really cool, so it was okay. And then we also did an exhibit on the creation and expansion of Redwood National and State Parks. I've worked for the state parks, which made this a really fun exhibit to work on. I got to call up people I knew, got to meet additional people that worked for the national parks. I got to check out the National Park archive up in Oric, which was really cool. and meet other people that were also doing exhibits on the anniversary that was happening. So the exhibit's grand opening was a big shindig. We had representatives from the state parks, national parks, and Green Diamond who came in, said a few words to everyone who had gathered, and then toured around the exhibit before Arts Alive. That year was also the first Eureka Street Art Festival, and it happened right in Opera Alley, which worked out great for us with our building being right on Opera Alley. We had a series of photos that had been taken by local students relating to the redwoods. So what we did was we cut out these colored pieces of paper, and people who were walking around during the Street Art Festival could write what their thoughts and feelings were about the redwoods, and we would wheat paste them up next to these pictures. It was really popular. I think we ended up running out of paper at one point and had to run around like crazy trying to find some more. But it was a really positive result. It was a year of growing collaboration with new people like the Eureka Visitor Center and tapping into current relationships that we already had, like Timber Heritage Association, who loaned us a bunch of logging equipment, including this saw, which was probably one of the highlights of the exhibit. Thing was probably 10 or 15 feet long. People love standing next to it, sticking their arms out and being like, look how big this thing is. And that was a lot of fun. That was a good exhibit. Also in 2018, we put together a museum blog, and I was doing a lot of research for exhibits and for items that we were collecting or having donated to us. And so it would just kind of be a repository for, check out this cool history thing I found. One of the most popular articles was the rise and fall of the Eureka streetcar system, which was brought about by finding a picture of some streetcars on fire in the streets of Eureka. It ended up going viral, which was kind of funny, locally at least. I mean, it reached a couple thousand people. But it started spurring these conversations about public transportation. And I ended up using the material from the blog for newspaper articles and exhibits and also presentations and things. So nowadays, it includes articles written by other people on staff and other volunteers here, and also just kind of what's going on at the museum. So it's kind of a cool resource for people. And in 2019, our former director, Ben, and a couple of the board members were able to track down these historic chandeliers that used to hang in the Bank of Eureka building. Cecile had taken them down in 1960 when she purchased the building because she thought they were kind of audacious. And we thought they were gone forever, but then it turned out they were actually only a couple blocks away in storage. So they didn't get very far. And so in 2019, we were able to secure the remaining funding to purchase the chandeliers, refurbish them, and hang them back up. But the process to hang these chandeliers takes a bit. You have to rewire it. There was all sorts of wiring in the ceiling we had to do. And also parts were missing. We had to get parts remade. So we were only able to get, so far we only have 2 of them hung back up, but we're still working on it. So thanks to dedicated volunteers like board members Chuck Petty and Lonnie Wellman, along with our electrician Bob White and his team, we were able to make this happen. And they are lit up now. So if you come out to the museum, you can see them, and they're pretty darn spectacular. They weigh about 500 pounds and are solid bronze. So it's pretty crazy. Also in 2019 was when the Orphan Apron project started. It was started by our registrar curator for Nilas Hall, Brittany Britton, who now works over at HSU. The idea was that there were a number of ceremonial aprons that are in the Clarke collections that for one reason or another are only the apron, and it's the full dress that's used in ceremony consists of an apron and a skirt that wraps around the back. So the idea was that we could take some of these orphan aprons that, if they're in good shape and are able to go out to ceremony, if we make a skirt that goes along with it, they can go out to ceremony. And that's a really important part of the life cycle of all the items in Nilas Hall, is participating in ceremony or being used for what they were designed to be used for. So with that project, we were able to get some money from the local seroptimists to purchase supplies needed to make the skirt. However, by the time we were ready to start actually working on it, 2020 happened. So we'll talk more about that later. Also in 2019 was the Humboldt History Symposium. This was something that was initially brought up by someone who worked at the Historical Society, Morgan Harvey. And the idea behind it was to bring together a bunch of history organizations in Humboldt County in one place to just kind of have a bunch of presentations, have tabletop exhibits, and just kind of get to know each other. There's a lot of people that in the history community that are in a bunch of different organizations, but then there's also people that are new here and aren't involved, and they might become involved if they're able to meet some people. We ended up selling all the seats, and there were still people that wanted to attend. We were able to somehow squeeze like 10 presentations into a day, and Ray Raphael spoke, and there was lunch, and it was this whole thing. And we were really looking forward to possibly doing a 2-day event in 2020. But then it happened. It was also sponsored by California Humanities, which was really cool. So it made it a really low cost event for people to attend. Riding on the heels of the History Symposium, there was a group called the North Coast Museum Alliance that had started many years earlier, but had kind of fizzled out. So we took all the contacts we had from the History Symposium and tried to reach out to additional museums that are not history museums, art museums and things like that, to get together and discuss issues that all the museums were facing, possible solutions, and also just kind of having that kind of collaboration available. Also not planning events on the same day, things like that. And we also were hoping it would be an opportunity for volunteers of different organizations to meet other people elsewhere and kind of do that networking. So 2020 started out with me becoming the director, which was pretty harrowing at the beginning. But we just kind of continued rolling along. In January, we opened an exhibit on the Chinese expulsion that had been spurred by someone dropping off a pot at our office and saying, I have this pot, it's been in my family for a long time and I feel weird about having it. And I was like, well, why do you feel weird about having this clay pot? And he's like, wow, my great-great-grandma or whoever it was dug this out of Chinatown after the Chinese expulsion. And I was like, oh, really? What? Chinese expulsion? I'd never really heard about it. So I started looking into it, did a bunch of research, found a bunch of stuff in the collection here that was also from Chinatown, created a whole exhibit, that whole thing. And then I had also been contacted around that same time by a group called Taiko Swing Humboldt, they were interested in bringing a temporary exhibit to the museum, showcasing local families whose relatives had been sent to Japanese internment camps during World War II. And we were able to make that work, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So that was a really kind of a way to start the year off with a bang. This is a picture of that exhibit. Down here it says HOPI, which is what the group's known as now. It's Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity. So this room is actually the museum's weapons vault. It's a permanent display area for the museum's weapons collection. But the only thing with permanent displays is that they kind of can become stale after a while. You might peek your head in and say, oh, it looks the same, nothing has changed, and you leave. But this was a good opportunity for us to try out doing a temporary exhibit. So we're able to manufacture these platforms that go over the weapons that are in the cases. So you could put things on top of it without putting weight on the guns or anything like that, protect the weapons that were in there and put displays on top. So this gave us a new opportunity for having community groups do exhibits, giving them a space that is pretty doable to fill, and also offering some variety to people that come to visit the museum. We did the same thing with the Victorian room. Well, not exactly the same thing, but we do kind of small exhibits in there highlighting different aspects of the Victorian life, holidays and also mourning rituals and stuff like that. And that also gives an intern or volunteer an opportunity to do the entire exhibit process from researching to putting things on display to sharing it with the public, getting interviewed, things like that. So anyway, the grand opening of the Pieces of Our Lives exhibit, which was the one in the weapons vault, included a very well-attended taiko drum performance by the new group Taiko Swing, or Humboldt Taiko. They work a lot with Taiko Swing Humboldt. And that was during March's Arts Alive, so that first weekend in March. It was lively, it was fun, and we found out that Nilas Hall actually has outstanding acoustics for drumming. We didn't know before. And by this point in time, early March, I was feeling pretty good about things. 2020 was gonna be a great year. Then, you know, we all kind of know what happened then. Womp womp. All of a sudden we had all these new acronyms: COVID, PPP, SBA, a global pandemic. We also had just brought on new staff members. And so things kind of went out the window for a little bit there, but we were able to get through the year. We worked from home. We all had to figure out Zoom, all the new tech stuff, trying to tap into our computers remotely, things like that, make some money. The things that got us through, though, was that we had new hires. So it did require training for people, but it also brought in new people with new ideas and new approaches to doing things. And also the kind of the candor and the bravery to say, what if we try this thing? Let's see what sticks. We ended up growing our virtual media presence. We expanded our newsletter to its current bi-weekly form, full of all sorts of interesting images, stories, and updates from not only here at the museum, but other history organizations as well, because they're all trying to get through this just like the rest of us are. All of these grew the number of people who knew about us and the kinds of things we were up to, even while the museum doors were closed. That growth, I think, played a huge role in our success in 2021. One thing that worked really well for us was doing these pickup dinners. So before COVID, we'd sometimes do these barbecues. We'd assemble all this food, we'd cook some stuff. A lot of times we'd end up with too much. There would be things that would end up going to waste. I think one time I brought home like 4 pounds of hamburger meat. And I was like, what am I gonna do with this? They also cost a lot, and the museum's not really set up to prepare food. So when the pandemic hit and we couldn't be preparing food or things like that, we thought, what if we reached out to a catering business, had people order their food ahead of time, pay ahead of time, and then come and pick it up. And then we would team that up with some sort of museum programming. So one time we did a movie, another time we did a panel discussion. Sometimes we would do both of those. And it produced significantly less waste. It ended up being a more certain fundraiser, and we were able to do different varieties with less guesswork. So it worked out really well. We worked with Brett Schuler on a number of them. He was really great to work with if you're ever looking for a caterer, very chill guy. So I highly recommend that. So 2021 started out with something that we had started planning in 2020. And it was called I call it the Tea and History program. The first one we did was called Wild Teas. It was held in Nilas Hall, which was still closed. Well, the entire museum was still closed at this point. So we could set up a table and do this whole virtual presentation. And that was hosted by Dessa and Shirley from the Trinidad Rancheria. This was part of a 4-part Tea and History series that we were going to do throughout the year. And the idea was that we would encourage people to interact with history at home through tea. So we'd be exploring its origins, uses, cultural importances, not only locally, but in other places around the world. I'd call it a flagship program for the museum in 2021, and we'll talk more about the other ones that happened throughout the year in a little bit. So while we couldn't all be in the same place for the program or even really to plan the program, tools like Zoom and Google Drive bridged the gaps and helped make these programs possible. The willingness of staff, board members, and other volunteers to learn these programs and be open to trying new things was something that shouldn't be understated. I've seen and heard of so many organizations here and elsewhere that went dormant through the pandemic due to the sharp turn to technology and people not being ready for it. I applaud everyone in the museum and outside of it who jumped in and grabbed the bull by the horns to keep programs and events moving forward and flexible through the pandemic. The trying new things approach also encouraged us to think more about who else in the community might want to collaborate with us and that we hadn't reached out to in the past. So here's kind of a bunch of logos of people that have collaborated with us over the last year, from installing a native plant garden out front of the museum so people could walk by even if we were closed and kind of learn something about native plants, to the very Victorian tea we held at the Eureka Heritage Society's Annie B. Ryan home and gardens in the summer, which we were able to do in person. Without the help of these businesses and organizations, not to mention all the individuals who pitched in time, efforts, and ideas and donations, this year would have been very different. So for tea and history, the idea came from a popular, I guess it's almost a business model now, trend of businesses. For instance, one of them was a whiskey company that would send you samplers of 4 or 5 whiskeys, and then you'd get a video link or whatnot, and you'd log on and you'd be tasting these whiskeys with other people and you'd be talking about it and whatnot. I think it started before the pandemic, but then it really took off during the pandemic when people were just looking for ways to interact with other people. And so we decided to try it out, but instead of using alcohol, using tea. And we thought it would be an interesting way to keep people engaged, but also raise some money for the museum. The 4 teas we ended up doing were wild teas, which I mentioned earlier, with native plants and local native people's uses for these plants. We did Gateway to Zen, which featured a demonstration Japanese tea ceremony and a performance by Humboldt Taiko, which was also virtual. Very Victorian tea with Eureka Heritage, which was probably our biggest tea event to date. I think we had about 90 participants come out for that, and it was outdoors. And then our last one is going to be in January 2022, which is a tea and cocktails event. And we're planning it right now, but encouraging companies to do some sort of tea related cocktail. So that should be really interesting. In the programs, people would get customized mugs. This is kind of a design that was for the very Victorian tea one, designed by Pen and Pine, who is a local artist, Jenna Katsos. And then we also kind of included some other stuff, depending on the program. So the results from that is that we found out that tea and history actually work really well together. It wasn't hard to find cross-cultural familiarity of tea and the long history of tea worldwide, and then incorporate that into history. It was very easy. After wild teas, which sold out incredibly fast, word started spreading that we were doing more of these tea events, virtual and then hopefully in person. And it started building a following of these people that might have attended one of them and wanted to attend all the rest of them, or had missed one and found out about it from a friend. And it started building this following, which was really cool. And we have done teas before at the museum. Some were at the Clarke, and then some were even at the Carson Mansion, which was really cool. But I think the reason that it took off this year partially had to do with the pandemic. People were just looking for something to do, and this was an easy thing that they could pick up the supplies from the museum, or we could ship them to them. We did have a number of people from out of the area that participated, from as far away as like Louisiana, which was really cool. But I also think that it connected really well with the museum's revamped mission statement and our goals of coming up with collaborative, relevant events that made a big difference in people getting excited about this. It was more than a social opportunity, it was collaborative learning. That was really cool. Connecting tangible things like tea to more intangible things like history, culture, and story. This year, we also started doing the Eureka Chinatown tours, which was co-hosted by the Clarke Museum and the newly formed Eureka Chinatown project. That whole project is a whirlwind. It initially started out with this lady here on the right in the bottom picture, Bree Merja. She lived here in town, and she had heard that Chinatown was a place here and that she wanted to put a plaque up to recognize that it was here, because most people didn't know where it was. But then she ended up getting in contact with people to build kind of a coalition of people interested in putting up a plaque, and it blew up into a group of 30 or 40 people and just kind of took off in all directions. And including doing these walking tours, but also a mural, and there's a monument in progress, and the renaming of the alleyway that goes through Chinatown. So these tours ended up serving over 170 individuals. We held 6 in-person tours from May to October, and I held 1 or 2 other ones for like school groups and things like that. And we also did a couple virtual ones. It ended up introducing the public to Eureka's Chinatown. Many people who had recently moved here or were students or might have lived here for a long time, but for one reason or another didn't know, learned about the existence of Chinatown, the really important role that Chinese people played in making Humboldt County what it is today. We had government officials go on them, tourists. We also had some of the descendants of Charlie Moon, who was known as the last Chinese man in Humboldt County, and also relatives of the Bear family, who Tom Bear was originally Charlie Moon's employer out on Redwood Creek. And so we had members of both of these families come out to the tours and contribute, and it was really cool. These tours ended up helping galvanize support for other projects like this mural that went up during the Street Art Festival this year, and some of those other projects I mentioned earlier. We're also working on doing a virtual like walking tour and self-guided tour booklets, along with a tour specifically for teachers that are interested in teaching this history. We're hoping to do that in the spring. I think walking tours are here to stay at the Clarke, and I hope we can find ways to expand them into next year. They work really well during COVID because we can all wear our masks, we can walk around outside and be relatively safe. It's easy to space out, and you can still participate with others in a safe way. Let's see here. So our most recent event was the Migration Festival, which we co-hosted with Centro del Pueblo. Our intent was to highlight the universality of human migration and things that people can gain from migration and the inclusion of migrant communities, including the opportunity for cross-cultural experiences, trying new foods, hearing new music, hearing new languages, meeting people that see things a little differently. It was a steadily attended event. We saw people throughout the day. We also had a vaccine clinic, which initially we all thought was a food booth because the line was so long. But that encouraged people to come out, get their vaccines, and see what was going on. It was also a bilingual event, which as far as I know, this is probably the first time we've done any sort of bilingual event. There's a exhibit that was set up in the museum here that has tags or labels in both English and Spanish. So it's encouraging additional people that might not come into the museum to come in and check it out. It also included, we had a cumbia band come out and play music. We also had this group here, which is the Flor de Piña, which is a dance from Central America. And it ended up helping us establish and grow some connections with other community groups here that we haven't really interacted with before. And we're hoping to do it again next year with more music and dance performances and hopefully more food. All the food this year sold out, which is a good thing, I think. So looking towards the future, a lot of what we're trying to do is expand access. So from things like helping provide the opportunity for Native communities to be able to use regalia items to fulfill their design purposes through use in ceremony, which is a thing that the museum has done in the past. We'll loan out certain regalia items to be danced, and then we store them here at the museum. But taking that idea and kind of expanding it, along with offering opportunities for these Native communities to come in and study regalia, to create their own, repair things like that, but also collaborate with organizations to promote the museum as a place for everyone that is also informed by the perspectives of a growingly diverse Humboldt County. This place has a fascinating history, and the more you uncover, the more complex, enriching, and relevant it becomes. And when it comes to expanding access, it's more than just having open hours. It's also rethinking the role that various barriers like language and lack of representation for Black and Indigenous and other people of color's voices and perspectives in prominent narratives, displays, and events, having additional perspectives incorporated. It also is in reviewing how the museum does things and how we can connect with those who are not reached through the kind of methods that we've always used. And with the pandemic, it's really encouraged us to experiment more to see what reaches people, what doesn't reach people, what reaches different people that we haven't reached before. And I think it's inspired us to really make the museum a more welcoming place for more people. As everyone says, what happens next is dependent on the COVID situation, how it's changing. But some of the things that you might expect to see from the Clarke in 2020, we're hoping to set up a few days for local Native people to come and view up close the ceremonial dress collection, as more and more families are holding things like flower dances, which is a coming of age ceremony for young women, and offering that opportunity to view these items. We're also planning on doing events with the Humboldt Asians and Pacific Islanders in Solidarity, who I mentioned earlier, who have been working with us and the Chinatown project to really promote a more full understanding of Eureka's Chinatown and the Chinese community. We're working on doing something to commemorate Chinese New Year, while also acknowledging the Chinese expulsion of 1885, which happened right around the same time. And also just kind of come together to officially celebrate what has been accomplished in that group over the last year. Because of the pandemic, we haven't really been able to get together and, give each other high fives and things like that because of the pandemic. So we also want to do additional walking tours, not only for the Chinatown project, but for other topics in Old Town, tours in the museum, tours outside of the museum, to give people an opportunity to interact with us, ask questions, and kind of have a more meaningful experience with the museum. We're also planning on doing reprisals of wild teas and the very Victorian tea, which we're hoping can be in person and in expanded venues so we can accommodate more people. And this isn't a complete list by any means. Our little crew is always coming up with new ideas. So what's really important is that you keep in touch with us to kind of see what is coming up next. So long story short, you won't want to miss what we have planned for 2022 and beyond. It's going to be exciting. And as I've said before, we can't pull this all off by ourselves. There's a number of ways you can help. You can become a member. We also have business memberships. And both of those help provide funding for us throughout the year. We also have a sustaining membership option where you can pay by the month rather than an upfront amount at the beginning or wherever in the year. You can attend our events. If you're a member, you can get in for free or even discounted cost if you're a member. You can also get a discount at Eureka Books, which is pretty cool. You can also volunteer with us. You can also join the board. It's not as scary as people think. I know board service can be really daunting, but it's actually rather fun. We have a good little crew working on things. You can also share information about our events with your friends and family. You can join our newsletter through our museum website. You can also follow us on various social medias like Facebook, Instagram. We're even on Twitter. We're also on TikTok. Or you can also donate to ongoing projects. And sometimes, one way of participating hits many of these. So this picture here was when Jerry Rohde came and did a virtual presentation. I think this one was on transportation in Humboldt County. He talked a lot about mule trains, which was he had some really great stories. But the admission costs for these helped us cover the cost of restoring the Lentel map, which is this gigantic map, paper mache from 1915. But yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to get involved. We have various projects that we're working on. We're trying to get a dehumidifier for Nilas Hall and a door to better control the the humidity in there, Humboldt County with our crazy humidity. We're also working on continuing to restore the interior of the Bank of Eureka building that we're in. If you come in, you can see some really just awesome gold. It's not actually gold, but it's something else. Gilt work kind of up on the walls. The entire ceiling is supposed to have it. But we have to raise money for that. So there's all sorts of things. There's pretty much something for everyone at the Clarke, and we're dedicated to continuing to increase that. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope we see you at the Clarke soon. Close this really quick.
Thank you, Katie. We do have questions in the chat. I can read them out to you if you want to.
Okay, I can see them too.
Okay.
Does anyone else remember the piranha in the aquarium in the museum? Whoa, I did not know there was a piranha. That's really cool. If anyone else wants to put in the chat if they remember that would be exciting to hear. Let's see. So the next one, do you have school outreach programs, either bringing in students or taking exhibits to schools? So when it's not a pandemic, we have accommodated a number of school tours. We have been doing some of them more recently. We've had small 10 groups of students, or 10-person groups of students coming in to tour around. And we have done virtual tours with elementary school kids and college age kids. But that's still kind of taking some time to bounce back from the pandemic. We also did have a school outreach program, but that was kind of under evaluation, and then the pandemic hit, so nothing has really happened with that. But I'm trying to get some people to help with revamping this student activity book that we have that gets given out when students come to visit. So yeah, I'm thinking though, as the pandemic kind of winds down and there's greater vaccination rates and things like that, I think students are going to start coming back out again, which is great. Richard asks, what are your main sources of funding? So we do get some money from our endowment and a trust fund that I mentioned kind of earlier on. We get some money from the city, but a lot of our money comes from memberships, donations, and admission. So people paying as they come in is kind of where a good chunk of that comes from. We also have things for sale in our gift shop, events, fundraisers, things like that. Let's see. So is the visitor center working to draw visitors into the museum? Do you have any idea of the number of visitors who come to the visitor center now that it's located within the museum? I haven't noticed visitor center signage on local street corners. So let's see, the first part, is the visitor center working to draw visitors into the museum? I would say definitely, yeah. There's people that might not have come in here because they were looking for information on, visiting the area, but then are like, oh, there's a museum? Okay, I'll go check it out, And the people that work up front are really good about encouraging people to walk through the museum when they visit. So I definitely think it has increased our numbers. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but having the visitor center has allowed us to be open more. We used to only be open 4 days a week, I think, when I first started. And now we're open 7 days a week, 10 to 5. So our open hours have just absolutely exploded. So more people are able to come by because of that. And for visitor center signage on street corners, yeah, there isn't a lot of it from what I've seen. But there has been a lot more work done virtually to tell people where the visitor center's at. So I think that's made a difference. For Maggie Augustine, who designed the chandeliers? That's a good question. I know one of our board members who's working most closely on the chandelier project knows more about it than I do. But they were custom built chandeliers. I don't think that the architect Albert P.C. designed them, but it might have been someone he worked with that designed them. But yeah, I'm actually not sure. But the shades on them are Art Deco era shades. So when they were originally put up, there were kind of these globe shades that were pretty straightforward. But then the bank went through kind of a update in the 20s, and they put these really cool Art Deco shades on it. I think they're called Empire shades. I think someone told me that. Yeah, let's see, did I miss anyone? I think that's everyone.
Yeah, I think you covered everybody. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask?
Yeah, I have one. Do you solicit contributions of art and historical pieces, books, paintings, etc.? And how is that processed?
Yeah, so especially with the pandemic, people have really been clearing out their houses. So a lot of people have been coming by, dropping off things, which is pretty funny. So usually kind of the main things we ask when people want to bring by something or show up with something is if the person can explain how it's relevant to local history. So like, was it made by someone who lived here? Was it sold by someone who lived here? We're looking for like provenance of the item, because it does happen where there are people that just kind of find old things and they're like, this thing is old and cool. And I'm like, yes, it is cool, but also we don't have a lot of storage. So trying to find things that really fit into our goal of collecting items related to Humboldt County's history specifically is really important. So like sometimes people have things and they'll be like, oh, I need to look a little bit more into it. And then they show up with like a binder just of a ton of information relating to the thing they're trying to donate. And I'm like, yeah, history in action. So that's kind of what we like to see. And so since we're a museum, we're collecting more like three-dimensional objects. So if people are trying to drop off photos or documents or things like that, we usually send them over to the Historical Society because they're more set up for paper documents, ephemera, things like that. We do have those collections here, but our storage is pretty limited and they do a lot more with that kind of thing. So we kind of send people that way. And if there's other people that have like really specific things like maritime things, I'll be like, go talk to the Maritime Museum, just to kind of help out those other people as well with things that they're more focusing on. Yeah. And I guess I do want to mention one thing, and another coming thing that's coming this year is that, so on November 19th, there's this thing called the Holiday Open House that Eureka Main Street is hosting. And there's a bunch of businesses in Old Town that are staying open late. I think they're open 5 to 8 is when this is running. We're going to be closing off the street in front of the museum, and it's an opportunity to come out and see the Timber Heritage Association trolley. If you've seen pictures of it kind of around, it's this little trolley that was originally made for a movie set that can now run on the rails. But since it's going to be dark, we're going to park it outside the museum, and they're going to decorate it with Christmas lights and things. So you can come and take pictures with it and on it and whatnot. But also the trolley will also be out during December's Arts Alive. And this is like pending rain, which is December 4th from 6 to 9. The trolley is going to be out, but we're also, and I think this particular thing isn't rain dependent. It's happening no matter what. We're going to have Christmas caroling happening. And Michael Fields is going to come out to do some storytelling for the holiday. So it's going to be really fun. There's also going to be hot drinks. I think we're going to have some snacks out too for people to come and check out. December's Arts Alive is always my favorite because it's just so festive and so fun. So it's going to definitely be something you want to come out and see and experience for yourself. So,
are there any other questions? Anybody?
I have a question. How would you describe the relationship with the native tribes today in the museum?
Yeah, so I would say it's pretty good. We have, we are doing our very best to be in communication with the tribal leaders on how things are happening at the museum. we have a group called the Nilas Hall Committee, which is made up of, I think we have representatives from all the tribes up here, definitely all the federally recognized tribes, that are coming together to look over how the museum operates around Native items and things like loaning items out for ceremony, displays, how the items are cared for, not just, you know, physically, but also spiritually. So we're doing our very best to bring those folks to the table and, you know, see what we should be doing from their perspective. We're also trying to do more with the Wiyot Cultural Center, which is not open yet, but they're kind of our neighbors. They're over by the gazebo. But I'm trying to talk with them about possibly doing like joint school tours. So like when a school group comes to the museum, they also go over there. Because like we have, you know, we have like a display on the Wiyot tribe, but it's not very like, it's not an entire cultural center, you know? So kind of encouraging people to not only visit us, but to also visit them, and learn directly from Native people. So.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
We're doing our best.
So you made a lot of progress, Katie. I think you've done a great job since
Thanks.
you've been on board. And we're very happy you've been able to accommodate this change with the pandemic, all these changes, and you've been very creative, which is fantastic for the whole community. So we thank you very, very much, and everyone for attending, and we hope you'll go visit the museum and participate in the events, and maybe even contribute and participate in any of the number of committees and activities they're doing. So I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving, because we're taking off next week. We won't have a brown bag lunch on Monday, but you return to Iceland on November 29th. Talk about volcanoes, glaciers, waterfalls, and puffins by Raleigh Lamberson. He's former HSU professor, and he goes adventuring. And he brings back wonderful pictures. They're going to take a trip around Iceland's Highway 1 called the Ring Road, which completely circles the island, has fabulous features. He has great pictures, so I think you'll enjoy that. Meantime, have a lovely Thanksgiving. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Katie, for all your fine work. I think you've done a fabulous job. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. Thanks everyone for coming out.
Take care.
Bye, everybody.